You're ready.
Okay, yeah, I'm starting. Starting now. Just making sure. Okay. Are the subtitle? Yeah, the subtitles are working.
Yep.
So,
Oh, nice.
can you just mute yourself?
Yeah.
This is Becoming a Disability Ally, and my name on Eventbrite is Zebra Support Network. I have multiple accounts, visual description, flashing, and safe space, and large text. This says Axel.
You're breaking up for some reason.
Can you hear me now?
It sounds like you're inside of a can.
How about now?
That sounds really good.
Can you please mute yourself? So, yeah, it's a photo of a lineup of people with varying disabilities. In the bottom, I have a link to my first workshop on my website, and my YouTube is called Living Well with EDS. So this is about becoming an ally to disabled people, but in order to understand how to support them, you have to understand disability. And also, in order to understand ableism, you have to understand disability. There are many models of disability. There's the medical model, the social model, and the spectrum model. The medical model says that having a health condition that limits one or more activities of daily living is a disability. Medical care is seen as the only cure, and a cure is the goal and solution. The disease is the problem of the individual. In the spectrum model, it says that for every condition, there's a range of severity and ability, and that all humans exist on a spectrum of mood, pain, and mobility. And then the social model, which many disability rights activists tend to favor, states that people have a disability when they interact with an environment that is not accommodating, and that environment that prevents them from doing what they need to then creates the effect of a disability. Disability is anything outside the social norm of mental health, pain, mobility, and body type, and disability is a socially created problem of exclusion, and inclusion into society is the way to fix it. Disability is the responsibility of both the individual and the community, as well as the environment, and equal access and adaptation is the way to fix it. So here, there's a photo of people taking the first three letters of disability away, leaving the word ability. And it says, if people see disability as a difference only, it will have less of a stigma and more acceptance. Problems with the definition of medical disability. It puts all the blame on the individual, and the solution to disability is individual, not environmental or societal. Society doesn't have to change, and the environment doesn't have to change. The individual has to. Disability is seen as something that has to be fixed and is always negative, and disability is a deficit and not a difference. So there are many dimensions of ableism. There's culture, there's many types of able-bodied culture or cultures that perpetuate ableism. There's the law. The law has a long history of legalizing ableism and discrimination or blocking access to necessary care. Words, which is what people say to disabled people or what people say to other able people that perpetuate ableism. Actions, which is how people treat disabled people that create stigma, violence, such as hate crimes and medical abuse. Beliefs, which are the driving force behind all of the other dimensions, and structural, such as lack of accessibility. Disability is not inability. There are multiple photos of wheelchair dancers, something that I love. So the impact of ableism causes anxiety and depression in disabled people because they aren't believed about their symptoms, conditions, or access needs. Creates negative health outcomes because doctors are slow to treat patients or unwilling to treat them. Creates shame and guilt over limitations and use of medication and mobility aids. Prevents disabled people from getting their access needs met. Creates more exposure to COVID because people are not believed about their risk category or access needs. Sets the stage for other forms of discrimination, and people are viewed as bodies and objects to be used at will and then disposed of. And it creates an environment of judgment instead of acceptance and belief. There's me sitting in my new wheelchair with my legs up in my old wheelchair. I used to experience discrimination and ableism every time I left my house in public. I've only had one person stand up for me when I was experiencing ableism. We need more allies to work with us, to stand up for us, and to protect our rights and dignity. We need more allies. Of about reasons people discriminate towards disabled people. The light gray is fear of catching disability, and that's 1.4%. The dark gray is economic necessity, that, disabled people are like a big burden on the government. The red is lack of knowledge and how to talk to, interact with disabled people. And then the turquoise is all of the above. Just look at that. Oh, yeah. And then for lack of knowing how to interact with people, it's 36.6%. For all of the above, 54.9%. And then something else, it's 2.8%. Here I have some quotes about accessibility. Access is a practice of love when it is done in service of care, solidarity, disability justice. How we understand access is also how deeply we dare to dream, create, and exist as a collective. So, there's a little and talk about language or verbal forms of ableism. Why does language matter? Violent movements start with violent and degrading rhetoric. A society that doesn't tolerate ableist language will not tolerate violence towards disabled people. But a society that is verbally abusive towards disabled people will tolerate physical violence and discrimination. The importance of inclusive language. It challenges somebody's ableist words and thus challenges their beliefs that nobody cares about disabled people. It makes disabled people feel uplifted and included instead of attacked, not believed, and invalidated. Ableist language sends a signal that being disabled is bad and automatically negative. The importance of language. Many disability-related slurs have a terrible history that people are unaware of, but that doesn't excuse the use of words of cripple and autistic as insults, automatically making them slurs. What can you do? Learn the history of these words. Replace words like lame, crazy, and cripple with alternatives. Educate and call out others. Just try to be more exact with your language. You know, so there's a study done um, by the Australian Bureau of Statistics that 1 in 12 disabled people have experienced discrimination in the past year, which is really scary. And then so this is another really good point, which is ableism sets the stage for queer and trans people to be institutionalized as mentally disabled, communities of color to be understood as less capable, smart, and intelligent, therefore naturally fit for slave labor, women's bodies to be used to produce children when, where, and how men need them, people with disabilities to be seen as disposable in a capitalist and exploitative culture because we're not seen as productive, immigrants to be thought of as a disease that we must cure because it's weakening our country, violence, cycles of poverty and lack of resources, and war to be used as systematic tools to construct disability in communities and countries. So a microaggression is an indirect, subtle, sometimes unintentional discrimination against somebody based on their disability in the context of ableism. These take the form of statements, actions, incidents, or exclusions. For example, wow, I couldn't do that. Can I pray for you? You don't look or act disabled. Or have you tried, yoga for your chronic pain? Congratulating somebody on something not worth congratulating, like getting dressed or going out of their house. Um, and also, a lot of people ask why suggesting things can be a microaggression. And that's because, treatment is between the disabled person and their doctor. And it also like implies that they haven't tried everything or that there's like a simple solution. Like it's so simple that a random stranger on the street could suggest the cure to your chronic pain that you've had all your life. And it's that easy. You just haven't thought of it or haven't tried it, really. So this is a graph about ways to fight ableism. There's education, disability, equal representation in the government, law like the ADA and anti-discrimination law, equal employment, and safe space for disability culture and disability rights. So this is the section specifically on allyship. What is a disability ally? An ally is a privileged member of a group, in this case, an able-bodied person, who uses their privilege to help benefit a member of a marginalized group or help benefit the marginalized group as a whole. In this case, it means an able-bodied person using their privilege to help raise awareness for the issues surrounding disability and ableism, and use their group membership as leverage for the disabled person to get access to new opportunities they would otherwise not have been able to reach. Allyship is an underrepresented form of love. So here, if you're an ally, there's always ways that you can improve. So you can unmute yourself. It's important to constantly reflect on yourself and your advocacy to see where and how you can improve. Discuss these questions with other allies and disability rights organizers. So I'm gonna go question by question and you guys can answer. Do I make events accessible to all disabilities? I
You or me?
I guess I can answer too, but I'm asking you because
Well,
you're the
absolutely.
ally.
With the subtitles at the bottom, um, and making it online so you don't have to physically attend an event, all contributes to making it an accessible event.
I mean, like, if you personally host events, do you do what you can to make it accessible?
Well, we've never hosted an event other than, a family event where we know someone might need some extra help and then, you work with it. So I think that's different.
well, if we
I mean,
know,
it still counts, so you can just answer for that. Like, people even aren't accommodating in that context.
well, if we know someone has special needs like dietary restrictions with Ed when he was having troubles with eating red
Gastro.
meat, so we would make sure we had something that everyone can enjoy, because that was something he wasn't able to participate in.
Right. And if there was nothing for him to eat and he just got hungry and tried to eat things and he had problems. Or
Yeah,
when we
also,
went to Mary's wedding and
yeah,
called ahead
also,
to,
a lot of disabled people don't actually like the term special needs because for us, our needs aren't special. They're just our needs. Like for
accommodate.
able-bodied people, our needs seem like, okay, so special needs sets the stage for us being seen as like high maintenance or complicated, or like, people call my access needs special treatment all the time. All the time. And so
Well, I
special,
wasn't.
wait, no, I know, I'm
Yeah.
educating you. Give me a second. And
Oh,
so, special needs implies that it's something different and something, special. It's not just different, it's extra, like it's special, like, and so that's why usually it's like access needs
or
or
accommodations.
yeah, accommodations. Like
Yeah.
that's usually what people call it because
Yeah.
special needs, usually people associate that with like you being like high maintenance and stuff. Anyways, so
Okay.
do I advocate for only one type of disability? Or do I tend to only focus on one type of disability when I am advocating for people?
And we're
For
supposed to
me,
be think of it in perspective to us, right?
yeah. Like for me, I know that because of my experience, I try to focus on, like draw from my experience. So I tend to focus on like rare conditions, physical disabilities, and wheelchair users. But I also try to not leave out like developmental disabilities and, like other kinds of disabilities.
Hmm.
So what about you?
I just try to take it as it comes up and just be open.
But I mean, a lot of people forget about like developmental disabilities, invisible disabilities, rare disabilities. That's why it's important to specifically target certain areas.
Right. However, in our small community and with the work we do, we don't run into people very much. So then you just have to be open and you know observant
Or I mean,
when you
when you're
do.
trying, like when you're trying to educate yourself on disabilities, like, do you just forget about one type of disability?
No, I always am amazed at. I mean, there's things you never knew about. You know what I mean? There's the things that you see on TV. Someone that's developmentally disabled, someone that has a prosthetic, someone that's in a wheelchair but they don't say why, someone that's blind, someone that's deaf. Those are all basic things you see, but there's so many other things that, like really, like, say, you never realize until you're around in town after being out in the country so long and then moving to town and experiencing the 4th of July, and then you start realizing, oh my gosh, what, how do people with autism that can't handle loud sounds or um bright lights
Or
or
epilepsy,
soldiers with
where it could
PTSD
trigger a
or
seizure.
epileptics. Yeah, exactly. Those things make you think, whoa, and make you more aware, but there's so much you don't know.
Because
And
that's why I ask, because people might just forget about like other types of disabilities, especially since I have certain types of disabilities. I was wondering if you might only like educate yourself on wheelchair users or connective tissue disorders, or if you try to learn about other types as well.
yeah, like I said, as things come up and you're put in a situation where you're more don't do that, where you're more aware of things. Fred Mertz, no, he's growling at your cat. Um, then that's when you kind of become aware of it and start educating yourself.
Yeah,
It's
but
a
I mean, also, you can't always wait for like situations to arise to educate yourself. Like if I learned about ableism before I experienced ableism, I feel like I would have been in a better place. So that's why I try to tell people to like be proactive and to educate themselves like before, and to like educate others like before things happen, so
oh
that
okay,
they don't have to let others experience ableism to speak up, because that just sucks for everybody.
right.
I mean, it also, it's like it makes more of a point, but it's also like sucks for the person that's experiencing it. So, what about you, Dad?
Yeah, I at ADEC, I there's a section, a department um called Mid Valley, and they hire disabled workers, and so I would have to go over there and interact with them and ask, questions, and can we change over to this project because we need these parts out sooner. And so, just understanding what the limits, uh, you know, what the limitations are and what they can and can't do, and work within that. Um,
Without
and
acting like it's a burden or a problem.
yeah, and they're very capable.
Yeah.
That department. So it was nice to see. Okay, I can get this many parts out in the next, whatever the time frame is, in the next 4 hours, and then um, so it was nice to interact and gonna educate yourself on what
Sorry, it cut
what
out.
the
Can
can
you
and can't
speak
do.
again?
You cut out.
Oh, where did you hear from?
Uh, you're talking about, that they're capable, and talking about like getting a certain number of parts out in a certain amount of time.
Yeah, so it was just nice to work with that department and interact, and you know know what they can and can't do, what um their abilities and limitations, and there were it was a nice interaction, and they're very capable of doing the work, so that was a
Yeah.
nice experience.
So, do I believe and perpetuate stereotypes about disability? I know that I try not to assume anything about disability, especially because a lot of people assume things about me. So, definitely not. But what about you?
Yeah, I that's the whole thing of try to be open and not assume anything. I mean, and the
But I
funny
mean,
thing is, the funny thing is, it's even on
Mom,
a
my point is that even if you don't assume about a wheelchair user, you might have assumptions about somebody with a developmental disability, or, like that
well, that's why I always
allyship isn't always equal. And so that's what these questions are trying to target, is helping people understand where people fall short in their allyship.
Right. Well, I always
So
try to ask. I mean, that's the best way to find out where you're falling short. But sometimes there's things that you don't realize makes you a bad ally. Like, you know how you were saying have you tried this? People saying that as a
yeah,
microaggression.
yeah,
And everybody does that, even like just to their peers. Oh, that didn't work for you. Did you try this? And then
but
they
it's not about a
generalize.
medical condition that they've had
No, no,
necessarily.
but what I'm saying is, but then people generalize that to even medical things. Like Manfred's diabetic, and he was saying, Andy will read an article in the paper about diabetes, and then Manfred, have you tried this? Manfred, have you tried that? And
Yeah,
he's
and
like, "Are you now a medical doctor? What the
yeah,
fuck,
and the
dude?"
thing that you have to understand is that we get this all the time from everybody, from friends,
Yes,
from family, from strangers. And so even though for you it's like, why are you getting, frustrated? I just said this like 5 times or one time. I've heard it 50 times, 100 times. So you have to understand that about, that for you, you might have only said it a few times, but we hear it so many times. Or like people asking me why do I walk some days and then I'm in my wheelchair others? I get that asked so many times by so
right,
many people. And even if you just ask it like once, it adds up.
for
And
sure.
but yeah, so I was curious, like, especially for disabilities that you're not exposed to, like, I remember one time we were talking about a TV show, and basically there's like a character in a wheelchair, and I remember that you said that he looked like retarded, and I was like really shocked that you said that. And
I
you
don't
know,
rem-
I mean, you can't remember everything.
No, I
And
don't remember seeing anything. I don't remember watching any TV
I
shows
no,
with.
I mean it happened a while ago, but like I just remember that. And that like I was really shocked. So and like a lot of people assume that like me, even just because I'm in a wheelchair, that like I have some kind of developmental disability. So like everybody usually has some kind of stereotype that
Bias.
they
Yeah,
perpetuate, or like that just because you've done something once that you can do it all the time. Like that's a
right,
major stereotype that people perpetuate a lot. Even, and it's like hard to know without talking to people too.
right.
So what about you, Dad?
Um, well, about believing in perpetuating stereotypes, it's because I've got um I'm hard of hearing on my left side. I'm deaf, and my right side is uh not all that great. So, you know, um the that whole thing about, and it's funny because I was
Do you need a
at
glass?
work, and there was my right side is the better side. So I'm like, hey, you want to switch places? Because this is my good ear. And I didn't know this, but it was an older lady. And she said, well, that was my good ear too. So we switched places. I can't hear you. Um, so it was kind of funny that way. But, the whole thing about you're, half deaf, half blind, you're like the Mr. Magoo type, just kind of bumbling around, being um, having really bad hearing when I get into some situations like at the grocery store. It's like, what? Their cashier's asking me something. I just cannot comprehend what the heck they're saying because now they're behind a glass and behind a face mask and the whole thing. So,
And do
you
you
know,
feel like people also have stereotypes about you because of that? Like, they feel like you're more stupid than you are because of that, you
oh,
know.
Oh, I'm sure it's like, oh, we gotta yell at this guy because he's like a brick, dumb as a brick wall. But so I'm sure it's, you know, there's that stereotype in there as well.
Yeah. Okay. So how do I, that's supposed to be do, how do I contribute to ableism and systematic oppression of disabled people? This could be inaccessibility, joking about disability, using disability as an insult, excluding disabled people from conversations of politics or intersectionality. A lot of people leave out disability when it comes to, can you take away the dogs?
Uh, yeah, I'll ask. Mom just took Ethel.
Because they're just like
And
making noise. But yeah, so intersectionality is like,
You want a treat?
sorry, it's just making some noise.
Yeah, do you want to put the dogs in the room for now, Pam?
Well, they just ate, so Ethel had to go potty. Come on, guys.
All right, Mom's putting them away.
But yeah, so
Are you okay to come in here? Come on, Ethel.
yeah, so intersectionality is basically the politics of the intersections of the marginalized identities, and a lot of people. Can you mute yourself? She's just yelling.
Get up and stay up.
Yeah, hang on 1 second.
Okay, so intersectionality, it's the politics of intersecting marginalized identities, and a lot of people leave out disability when they're talking about intersectionality, which contributes to just a lot of exclusion and also a lot of disability rights not being disseminated into the larger circle of like left politics, which is a large loss for us. Yeah, so it, like I said, it could just be not thinking about how certain things impact disabled people, from laws to not including us in the conversation. I feel like for me, and it's something that I work on, it's trying to learn more and include more intellectually disabled people in my conversations about um, disability rights and accessibility, and about how, like, what accessibility looks like for them, and how certain laws and things impact them that also impact physically disabled people, you know because I've had times where, somebody who was developmentally disabled, who everybody else had completely written off and was like making fun of, was the only person who stood up for me when I was being discriminated against. And he had more character than everybody else in the room. And it was just such a loss that like nobody else could see that, so I just try to include that type of disability in my politics, because, and obviously that's just because I don't know as much about that as I do about physical disabilities, because I live my life with a physical disability. Okay, now you can unmute yourself.
I guess we were unmuted.
Okay. So in
So
terms of including disability in when you talk in terms of politics and things like that, you know, the disabled community is really one of the more silent minorities. 'Cause
And
you
a
hear a lot of,
major part of that is inaccessibility.
oh, absolutely. You know, because you hear a lot of, Black Lives Matter, which is important, and the LGBTQ community, which, again, is important, but the disabled community seems to um, not get nearly as much representation or as much, um,
Allies.
yeah, as much allies really pushing for um, accessibility and equality.
Yeah, and that's why I do this, is because if anything, we need allies more than other groups. And like there's so many structural and cultural barriers, and that, are present in a very unique way. And we're so underrepresented. And even in intersectionality and like lefty politics, we're so often forgotten. And so that's why, it's like people need to be able to include us. And so leaving us out of the conversation is contributing to ableism.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, do you feel like you remember disability rights when you talk about politics?
No, I don't think we do. I think that people are so concerned with a certain theme that they're not looking at the whole spectrum of who it affects.
I mean, I'm talking about you specifically.
Oh, um, I'm trying to think of times where we've read, like say you're going through your voters pamphlet
I
and you're
mean,
looking at
like,
certain.
remember when the Affordable Care Act was going to be repealed?
Yeah.
And that would greatly
Yeah,
impact disabled people.
right,
Did
right.
you think of disabled people when I mentioned that?
No, I mean, I just remember that. I mean, it's not something that pops in my mind. I just think of all the millions of people in whatever circumstances they're in that it adversely affects them.
Yeah, and because like disabled people, over 2 in 5 are in poverty
Right.
on top of having a disability.
Jeez.
And only 10% are employed, and the average pay is $2.15 an hour
Right.
because of sub-minimum wage laws. So that's why we need to be remembered in politics.
Yes, I agree.
And I mean, can you think of any other ways that you contribute to ableism, like include, like joking about disability or stuff like that?
Well, I know that we have in the past. I mean, in the 80s, there was a million jokes about what do you call a guy with no arms and no legs on the ground or hanging on a wall? And people don't think about it in a real sense. They think of it as a way to make a funny pun, you know?
Yeah. So, oh yeah, and then
And that was huge in the 80s.
yeah. Well, we already covered the intersectionality thing. And then would you stand up for disabled people even if it didn't benefit you?
Oh, absolutely. Whether it was someone who was being harassed or someone who was being verbally abused, yeah,
Right.
step in
Well,
and
and it's not just the disabled, it's anybody that's being picked on for whatever
And
reasons.
mom, I know that you want to widen your scope, but we're talking about being an ally to disabled people
Oh, I'm sorry.
because they don't have allies.
Right.
So I want you to just remember that when we're talking.
All right.
Okay, please. Because being disabled impacts every single part of your life, from how
Yes.
people perceive you to how you interact with the world. To I've had so many people not offer me help because I'm young and in a wheelchair, and they didn't believe that I truly needed help. And so that's why it's important to remember that, yeah, for you, it might just be, oh, yeah, they're a person, but for a lot of people, they see the wheelchair first, not
Right.
last. So this goes over types of allies. There's the true ally, which is, you actually want to help regardless of if it benefits you or not. Performative, which is you only help superficially and for show, and it's also not sustainable. Opportunistic, you only help when it benefits you. The secret ally, only sharing advocacy in private messaging or conversations. Lazy, which is believed values unbacked by further learning actions or risk, and no actual advocating action. So what does an ally do and why be an ally? Educating yourself by listening to and engaging with disabled people with respect instead of entitlement. It includes raising awareness for disability rights causes, contributing to the disabled community by being present in protests, challenging ableism when you see or hear it, and being an ally is a commitment and a practice. Why be an ally? Some disabled people are fully or partially nonverbal, and some have a severe intellectual disability and can't verbalize thoughts or feelings like others can. Some disabled people can't speak in venues like able-bodied people can due to the lack of accessibility. Some chronically ill or disabled people have such severe symptoms that limit their functionality and energy, causing them to have brain fog or pain and need extra rest. Being an ally allows you to communicate the feelings and needs of the community without speaking over them, and using your platform of privilege on the issues that matter the most. So my guest speaker can come. So this is her introduction. What's the biggest challenge to being a disability ally? Why are you a disability ally? Everyone deserves an advocate and someone in their corner. No one should be left alone and made to feel less than others. End of story. Why is standing up for disabled people important when you aren't disabled? I have friends and family who are disabled, and we're all just trying to live full and meaningful lives. Limiting that or taking it away from someone is an atrocity to humankind. What's the biggest challenge to being an ally? It's so easy to get trapped up in ableist verbiage and thinking. Just because someone could do the dishes yesterday doesn't mean they have the capacity to do it today. It's not laziness, it's a restriction on their body, or it's a restriction their body has put on them. Everything takes energy, and whether it was a bad night or a flare up, the energy can be gone before the day begins. How do you get involved in supporting disability rights and disabled people? Or how did you? I have advocated for my husband, and when I hear stories from my mom about my dad's medical treatments, I spoke up and gave them informed suggestions on what to ask his doctor. When I was with my 83-year-old father-in-law, I would speak directly with his doctors and we would discuss possible treatments. I will jump in to try and get petitions signed and offer suggestions on how to get more support. If I can, I will do it. I will at least put forth an effort, and someday I may need an advocate, and I hope someone will be there for me. And here's a photo that says, "Do you see me or my disability?" Which, seriously, I feel that's so hard. So this is about how to be an ally, which is have a mindset of accessibility, not accommodation, which is basically have a mindset of making things available to everybody instead of accommodation, which is like just trying to change things make all events accessible, even if it's just a post. Use person first language unless otherwise specified. Don't touch somebody's mobility aid without asking. Be patient and ask questions directly to people with disabilities. So allyship, again, is something that can constantly be improved upon. So ask yourself hard questions. Directly ask disabled community organizers what they need. Learn what you can on your own through the internet. There's a lot of information out there. Educate others when the opportunity arises. Don't just speak up when it helps you. Reflect on how you can improve your allyship. Understand how intersecting marginalized identities impact a person. Learn about disability from disabled people, not TV. Dissect your stereotypes and expectations of disability. So, obviously there's allyship, and anti-ableism is a key part of allyship. Um, and anti-ableism is just challenging ableism whenever you see it and having the mindset of being against ableism again. So some very easy ways to improve how you are an ally. Don't use the term wheelchair bound. For us, a wheelchair is freedom, not, restriction. Hire us and pay us well, not sub minimum wages. Don't make content about us without us. Change can't happen without us. All justice is disability justice. Don't stop inviting us places, even if we don't show up often. So, anti-ableism is strategies, theories, actions, and practices that challenge and counter ableism, inequality, prejudice, and discrimination based on apparent and non-apparent disability. What can you do? Point out barriers, journal about your thoughts, be empathetic, sincere, and open, share articles and first-person perspectives about disability and ableism, presume competence, acknowledge people with disabilities, join online communities. So again, this is about specific groups like women with disabilities. 29% of births by mothers with disabilities are not attended to by a skilled health worker. Persons with disabilities are at a higher risk of unwanted pregnancies and STDs. 22% of married women with disabilities have an unmet need for family planning. And then there's basically a 25 to 33% increase in domestic violence helpline calls from Argentina, France, Syria, Cyprus, and Singapore. And so if you're disabled, first of all, these facilities like women's shelters are often not accessible. And then also it's a lot harder to leave an abusive relationship physically. So there's a lot of easy steps that you can do about ableism, such as making sure that disabled people are included in conversations about disability and ableism, interacting with disabled people, being mindful of your language, educating yourself about disability and also how ableism impacts people, and then speaking out when you see ableism. So there are many roadblocks to allyship, but I'm just going to cover 3. Recognize that our society and medical system is ableist, and we all have to participate in the system to survive and thrive. Because of this, we have to work to dismantle the system while inside of it, because it also ruins and ends lives, like price gouging that forces people to ration life-saving medication like insulin. If you want to learn what the disabled experience is like, talk to an actual disabled person, but also respect their space and know that you can easily look up generic information, and that you should talk know what you should talk to somebody about, like the experience of disability and ableism. You can learn about laws and history by books and Google. Don't use disabled people like Google. It's frustrating and draining. but if you want an in-depth conversation, we'll more than appreciate it. And then obviously not knowing how to get involved with the disability community and finding people to discuss disability rights with. That's a lot easier online, but not so much in person. And then it's also harder to find people to create a community of accessible democracy around. So what can you do against ableism? Be an ally, call out ableist language, ensure accessibility, volunteer at disability rights charities, educate yourself and others on ableism, its impacts, and the struggle for rights and accessibilities. Emotionally support and validate your disabled friends. Normalize, not fetishize, disabled people having sex because of devotees, which are people who fetishize disability. Sign and share petitions and donate your energy to campaigns. So adults with disabilities report frequent mental distress almost 5 times as often as able-bodied adults. Best ways to fight ableism. Appeal to empathy. Describe the experience of being disabled and experiencing ableism. Ask for them to imagine living through this on a daily basis. Challenge them. Challenge ableist beliefs with logical points and real examples of disabled people doing things that they say that are impossible. Calmly explain your points and views. Do not get angry or belligerent. Educate them. Educate people on the long, hard road to rights we have endured. Explain the many injustices we face daily. Explain the laws that protect and perpetuate ableism that are still in place. Many people have no idea about these. 1 in 5 disabled people face extra costs of around $2,500 a month related to their condition. What can you do about institutional or structural ableism? In the workplace, talk to your boss about inaccessibility, stand up for disabled coworkers, problem solve when people say making things inclusive and accessible is too hard. If you're an employer, pay disabled workers minimum wage just to ensure equal access and inclusion. In the law, look up ableist laws, contact your local state representatives about changing them, support NGOs and activists that are campaigning against them. SSI and poverty, or SSDI, sorry. Financially support disabled friends and relatives if you can, or donate your energy and time to a charity that alleviates poverty in the disabled community. Structural and accessibility. Support initiatives and charities that aim to make the world more accessible. Give your money to accessible businesses. Start petitions against inaccessible businesses or raise awareness of the money that inaccessible businesses are losing to try to persuade them to become accessible, and support existing petitions and movements. Questioning stereotypes about disability can jumpstart high-level discussions and pave the way to questioning harmful stereotypes about other marginalized groups. So the best ways that I challenge ableism: appeal to empathy, describe, so this is more when people are ignorant, and then educating people is more when people are actual have prejudice or bigotry. So for empathy, describe the experience of living with a disability and ask them to imagine being barred access to buildings because of the way that you're born or your genetics. Describe the experience and frequency of ableist interactions and ask people to empathize with the time that they were discriminated against. Describe that I can't help being born this way and it's unfair to be treated differently for something I didn't choose. Educate people. So many people have no idea about the past and current injustices disabled people face. Calmly educate them. Calmly educating them can help them understand why disability rights is so important. Fighting bigotry with facts about the financial benefits of including disabled people in the economy and the very small cost of accessibility helps. So I'm just going to go over some very basic things that you can do to figure out what a disability ally is. Being an ally is not conditional. You can't be an ally to only one person. You can't be an ally to one person or a group of people. If you exclude people from your allyship, you are not an ally. You are either an ally to everybody or nobody. If you are an ally to the people you like, you are not an ally because basic respect should not be conditional. But also, okay, good. I am recording. If somebody calls you out on ableism, do not deny it or make excuses. Listen to what they say and then take that into account. Try to grow from the experience. Saying, but one time I helped a disabled person, or I can't be ableist, my grandma is disabled, doesn't help at all. And then the photos are black and white of disabled people doing sports. How to be an ally continued. Be mindful of how you approach somebody to ask questions, especially if they're a stranger. There's a world of difference between somebody coming to me saying, "What's wrong with you?" before hello, and somebody starting a conversation, and then asking if they can learn more about my condition. Be aware some people have PTSD from how they acquired their disability, and respect if they don't want to talk about it. Imagine if somebody asked you about your medical history while you were rolling down the street or shopping, or just trying to live your life. How would you feel? Constantly grow and learn and try to improve yourself. You may be a better ally to full-time wheelchair users than to part-time wheelchair users. You may not include trans or Black disabled people in your advocacy, or you may not consider how having a rare condition changes how ableism impacts a person. Watch your language and don't use disability as insults or adjectives. Also call out the ableist language of others and don't joke about disability. And then allies advocate, listening goes far, get active in the community, and read about disability rights. So 7 million adults with depression say their disability interferes with daily life. And 1 in 5 citizens with disabilities were in poverty in 2015. Now it is 2 in 5. Ableism, and then question and challenge stereotypes of all kinds of disability and discuss it with others. Call out the ableism of others, even when your friends or relatives with disabilities aren't around. The only way to dismantle ableism is to challenge it constantly and to show that we won't stand for disabled people to be disrespected just because they aren't there. Consider the idea that a disability isn't automatically a bad or negative thing. Well, they can be painful. It's only a tragedy when society fails to protect its most vulnerable group, like during COVID. Keep up to date on disability rights news and read about our history. Don't tell a disabled person to be quiet or not speak up about their doctor's disability, symptoms, or experience with ableism. It's part of our day-to-day lives, and we already have to be quiet about it and need a space to be open about our reality. If a disabled person's disability makes you uncomfortable, it's not their problem or fault, it's your issue. Help a disabled person out of generosity, not pity, or the expectation of incompetence. Don't ignore people's disabilities. Oh God, I hate when people do that. Don't be offended if a disabled person doesn't need your help. Don't assume that all disabled people know each other. Recognize that some disabilities are invisible and be empathetic. Remember that allyship is a commitment and a practice and takes time for it to become second nature. Mistakes are natural and don't get too down about it. Be willing to learn. Being willing to learn is help, and help is good enough. Make events like protests and marches accessible to all. There are lots of resources and information online, like blogs, vlogs, articles, and social media. So, when you're being called out, center yourself, listen, acknowledge and apologize, inquire, and then move forward. So there's a massive difference between disabled and handicapable. Disabled is not a bad word. Don't avoid using the word disabled. It's not a bad word. But avoiding it minimizes our experience as disabled, how much medical care we need, and the ableism we face. It also implies disability is a bad thing. Most people say something like this: you're so productive, or you do so much, so you aren't disabled, you're handy-capable. That needs to stop. Words like handy-capable were created by able people to avoid the word disabled. And that phrase also implies that disabled people aren't capable. It diminishes how severe somebody's symptoms are when they do something and how much medical care they need to be productive. If somebody does have a health condition, feels empowered with differently abled or spoony or another word, also respect it. Don't argue with how people self-identify because it's something that they put a lot of thought into. Say the word disabled. Many people argue with me labeling myself as disabled because I'm young and have an invisible disability. The most common excuses are, but I do so much. I'm too young. I look fine. If I call myself disabled, I'll give up. Disability is always negative. Doing a lot doesn't negate my disability. Disability has no age requirement. Disability has no look. I'm already disabled and I haven't given up, so there's no point in denying it. Disability is difference, not a curse. It's empowering to be recognized as disabled in this environment. So accessibility is another important part of being an ally. 15% of people that have a disability say that it affects how they use the internet. So using technology can make things way more accessible. Use adaptive programs to make the internet accessible. Technology can make things more accessible for disabled people in many ways. If they can't physically come out of their house, you can have a Zoom meeting. If they're deaf, you can turn on subtitles. If they're blind, you can use visual description. If they have seizures, remove any videos of flashing lights. If they have issues touching the screen, use voice control. So have perceivable information, a good, clear user interface, understandable information, and robust content. Remember, and then also remember people with sensory processing disorder and reduce bright lights and loud sounds. Reduce and minimize flashing lights or have a flashing light warning for epilepsy. Have a trigger warning for PTSD. Have speech to text options for physical disability and a large text option and inverted color for visually impaired, and then audio description for the blind. And then here are some web accessibility guidelines. Use simple linear formats and avoid tables. Enable keyboard navigation. Use color strategically. Ensure that forms and PDFs are accessible. Embed links into specific words and phrases. Format by using headers and subheaders. And then everybody has their own journey from being indifferent to being an ally, but usually it starts by asking, listening, showing up, and then speaking up. So, and then here's my own interpretation. It's the cycle of allyship. Acknowledge your mistake, or more like learning from a mistake. So it's acknowledge your mistake and that ableism is not on purpose. It's ingrained and takes work to unlearn. Listen and learn from disabled people who have experienced ableism and the disabled experience. Apply what you learned in everyday life to make the lives of disabled people better. Get feedback and advice from the disabled people in your life, and then change your words and actions to best support them. Support. You have a disabled loved one. Awareness. You become aware of some issues disabled people face. Listen and learn. You learn about disability rights from disabled people. Readjust. Change whatever mistake you make. Come together. Become more active in the disability rights community. And then finally, you're an advocate and you advocate for others even when they aren't there. And then another stage is from ignorance to pity to care to friendship to working together. And then here's how to help disabled people in your life. Offer help physically if they need it. Help them organize their medical appointments, like call the pharmacy. Listen to their experience with ableism. Stand up when you see them discriminated against. Educate others on disability. Respect the labels they choose. Support the hobbies they can do. Choose accessible places to meet. Understand that limits can change day to day. Work on unlearning ableism and not using ableist terms. Don't move their mobility aid without asking. Learn if anything triggers their symptoms and help them avoid triggers. Be a supportive listener. Help them with what they ask and don't try to offer something else because it implies you know better than them or their doctor. Take care of your own frustration and helplessness over having a loved one go through disability. So, questions to ask yourself as an ally. How have I internalized ableist messages from society? Also, you guys can unmute yourself. So it's definitely different for disabled and non-disabled people. But for me, I've internalized the idea that disabled people are not worth as much as able-bodied people, that our bodies are disposable, and that we are a burden. What about you?
Yeah, it's funny how some of that slang or um, some of the verbiage to put down someone with a disability kind of works its way into language, like lame. That's lame. Well, the term lame is someone that they have a disability with their leg and their leg
Yeah,
is lame or their arm is lame, but the general meaning is it's stupid or it's lame. So
yeah, or that it's
it's how
not
it's
fun.
worked. It doesn't work properly. So just the way that the verbiage is kind of ingrained in language
Yeah,
perpetuates that.
yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. What about you, Mom?
No, I totally agree with Dad. I mean, I know I even said something during therapy about something. I don't know. I was trying to explain something and I said something about "Ugh, that's just crazy." And I didn't, I'm not trying to say something's mentally, you know,
Yeah, I mean,
neuroses, psychoses, schizophrenic. I'm not trying to say something like that.
yeah, you can use the words like wild or out of control. That's
Yeah,
usually what I say.
frenetic. Yeah.
And then, how can I better the lives of disabled people? For me, that is working towards improving their lives through disability rights. What about you?
Well, it really would be becoming an advocate and helping those that you
Encounter.
encounter with if they're struggling to lift something off a shelf in the store or whatever it is that they're struggling with, just to
Ask them if they need a hand or, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And then,
And see them,
yeah,
like you said,
like people see my wheelchair, not me.
Yeah, but
Why is it?
that's the weird thing though too is if they see your wheelchair, then you would think that that would then immediately validate, oh, this person has something that limits them. They have to use a chair in whatever capacity. Not make it as a way to question, are you really sick? Are you
Because
attention
I'm
seeking?
young and people have a very specific idea of disability.
Well, I remember that with that neurologist guy. I mean, holy crap. I remember
Yeah.
sitting there thinking, okay, this guy's going into grandpa mode, and not the good kind of grandpa mode, the kind of grandpa mode where you're thinking, dude, you're so out of date and out of touch. And this is so inappropriate, and then you
Yeah,
knew,
if I called myself disabled, that I would just like give up and stop doing stuff.
right.
But yeah, so and then why is it important to recognize how disabled people contribute to society? Because society often doesn't recognize that disabled people do contribute to um our world.
Yeah, well, I think everybody recognizing that we all contribute and trying to
Mom,
redefine what our
mom,
society is.
disabled people, not everybody.
No, I know. I'm just saying, socially, we have a lot of work to do
Yeah, but
to, to recognize that we can redefine and make our world into something meaningful for everyone.
yeah,
Disabled,
but
LGBTQ, people of color, male, female, non-binary. I mean, and I
yeah,
understand you're talking about disabled, but
and just do you remember what I said earlier
yes,
about, staying on track, that this is about
I'm
being,
trying to stay on track. I'm just saying on a large level,
but
it
people
can't
don't say that
just,
LGBT don't contribute anything to society, so they should die.
there are some people that say
Yeah,
that
but
think they're the wart on the face
mom,
of this earth.
the majority of people think that about disabled people.
Hmm, okay.
The majority, not the minority, the majority.
Okay.
LGBT acceptance is at an all-time high. According to that statistic, over 60% of people say that disabled people are a burden on society and have a fear of disabled people, specifically because of economic reasons.
But see, that's why I'm saying socially we have to look at how we define our world and what we want from our world.
Yeah,
People have this, we have this ingrained thing that to be, being a society, you have GDP, you produce a certain amount of wealth, you have this contribution, and it's not even a cultural contribution, it's monetary. It's something that helps the few wealthy get wealthier and marginalizes anybody else that they see as unworthy or unable to contribute to their coffers. And
yeah. I
and
always talk
disabled
about
people
our
are at
cultural
the top.
contributions.
Right. It all has to be shook up,
Yeah,
you
but I mean,
know?
like I said, just remember that I'm talking specifically about disability allyship.
Yes, I
And
understand.
like I said, LGBT people have so many allies and we don't. So that's why it's also important to not always widen the scope to like, oh, everybody. And
No, I'm not trying to. I'm just saying that, never mind. It's,
no, I mean,
it,
I get it. I'm just trying to explain why it's important to keep this specific goal in mind.
yes,
So, and then why is it important to learn about the history of disability rights? Well, for me, it's really important to learn about how others have fought for rights, and also it's really important to see the history of ableism. Like disabled people have been paid sub-minimum wages since before the 1920s,
right,
and we're still being paid sub-minimum wages all around the world legally.
right. Well, and the whole thing with eugenics. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
it's so
pervasive on
important.
so many levels.
Like when people are like, oh, like you guys have it so easy, like why are you complaining? Like, no, we don't. We've had a really hard road. and things still aren't easy. Like, it's so important to understand that.
Well, it's definitely important to understand, yeah, the history, because um for, you know, well, throughout history, the disabled community really had
It's vulnerable.
no rights. They weren't even allowed to show their face in public, like the ugly
Oh,
laws.
the ugly laws. Yeah.
Which is just
Bullshit.
absolutely draconian. The fact that it's only been, you know, since what, 70s, 80s, that the disabled community was given access to even vote. So to understand how um, marginalized the disabled community has been for so long, um, and how why it's important to take steps to really reverse that.
Yeah. And then, um, how can I challenge stereotypes of disabilities? Educating yourself and then educating others in a methodical way.
Yeah, I think
Do you have
educating is important. It's just to educate people that um disabled, just because you're disabled doesn't mean you don't have anything to contribute. You know, their contributions to the disabled community, their contributions can be tremendous. And um it's a shame that the average wage is $2.15 an hour for what contributions the disabled community does make.
Yeah. And then, how can I stand up for disabled people's dignity and rights? Just like being and then knowing that you're prepared to stand up for disabled people, even if it doesn't benefit you.
Or you cut out for about 10 seconds in the middle of what you were saying.
It's like just being prepared to stand up for disabled people, even if it doesn't benefit you.
Yeah, I think that's important. I mean, it's funny, the distinction between someone who is really an ally and someone who does it just for their own self
Agenda.
gratification, like the performative ally, where they do it just to make themselves look good, or the opportunistic, well, I donated to this charity to make myself look awesome, so that way people will, you know, buy stock in my company.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then how can I get involved in disability rights without speaking over disabled people? I would say, like online is a great place, like joining communities and sharing their posts and articles, that way you're not speaking over them. You can even add what you think, but you're not speaking for them.
Yeah, I agree that internet, you know, and the different social media is a great way to really advocate and, you know, kind of bring awareness to the disabled community, and, you know, some of the things that we all can do to help advocate.
Yeah. So now we're just gonna do a little role play. So you're in a shop and the owner is discriminating against a customer in a wheelchair specifically because of the disability. Dad, what would you do?
Well, what is he doing? Like, is he
And
telling?
would you do nothing? Would you say something?
Well, I would definitely say something that, just because
I mean,
they're in a wheelchair, doesn't mean they're um less than a customer, less than someone who you should um be helping. It would depend on if they were being verbally abused, then you would step in, or I would step in and, you know, say that is not acceptable.
yeah,
But yeah, I would definitely step up and you know come
yeah,
come to their not aid or rescue or anything, but just step up and try to be an ally for them.
yeah, yeah. Well, but that's such an important distinction too, is that you're not rescuing them, you're just showing that you care. Like,
Right.
so, mom, you're on the street and you overhear somebody saying to somebody who has autism or Down syndrome that they should have been aborted because they're too stupid to have a life. I've literally heard people say that.
Yeah, that's when you just step up and dude, what the
I mean,
fuck?
I
Get
mean,
out of
just
here and get out of this person's face. Everybody has a right to live. If it's the United States, I mean, it says that every man is, you know, has the right to pursue happiness and freedom, and we have rights, and that is extended to these people too. And you have no business talking to them or getting in their face. And I would just tell them to go now, or I would be calling the cops. And then I would ask the individual that is, if they had Down syndrome, or autism, if they are okay and if they need any help, of any sort. Do they want me to walk with them until they feel like they're in a safe place? Of course, I'm not going to touch anybody because, especially
yeah,
autistic people, can't handle that. I
yeah. I
mean,
like,
if someone
especially
did need,
if you get overwhelmed too, like sensory things are more heightened as well.
yes, exactly. And if they needed to get to, a quiet spot or a safe place or needed help in some way, I would ask what I could do.
Yeah. Okay.
Could I
So,
hit that person? That's
and that
probably not conducive to.
dad, you are at work and you hear your boss tell his worker with a limb difference that his work is subpar because of his disability, so he deserves sub minimum wages.
Oh, you know that.
That's when you go to HR.
Yeah, that's definitely when, um, if the your fellow worker doesn't know
Hey,
their
no.
their rights as an employee, um, I would definitely ask them to go and report that to HR, because um, that's workplace harassment and discrimination.
It's discrimination. I had that happen. Did you know that? Hold on and I'll tell the story.
We can do it later on a call.
So when I worked in electronic manufacturing, there was a girl, her name was Jet, actually. That was her nickname. She had lost her leg below the knee in a motorcycle accident. And her she was a really good worker, but sometimes when she got hot or had to walk around a lot, she would lose suction on her prosthetic, and then she couldn't get up, she couldn't do things. She'd need someone to take what she was working on and take it to the next station or something. And so I did not know this at the time, but her supervisor was harassing her and like putting notes in her file saying, she was a good worker, but she was limited because of her leg, and she had to take days off because of her leg. And I stood up for her and told her to come on my team, and I had her transferred because I told her that, she did what she could do, and that was sufficient. And when she needed time off, that was what would happen. And she would never be penalized for that, and never should be, and it should never be in her file. I mean, oh, it was awful.
Yeah,
And
and then oh, sorry, continue.
oh, she was on my team for a long time, and she really struggled with depression and self-esteem, and I was really proud. My whole team stood up and advocated for her and encouraged her not to give up. She'd go to doctors and they tell her, this is as good as it gets, sorry. And then finally she found somebody in Oklahoma that did special prosthesis, that were supposed to be like, you could climb a tree if you wanted to. You could go dancing, and so she called them and they gave her a scholarship, and she went to Oklahoma. We gave her time off and she came back, and it made her whole life just
Yeah.
open up for her. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I just have one more. And, somebody actually said this to me when I was outside in my wheelchair, which is that if COVID only killed disabled people, COVID would be a good thing. So you overhear somebody tell a woman with a cane that exact phrase. Dad, what do you do?
Well, I mean, if I actually heard someone say that,
I'd be bailing dad out from jail.
yeah, it's like, who are you to judge who's worthy to
Yeah.
live and not? I mean, I would definitely have to step up and have some words about the person who said that. It's like, okay, so I'm sure you've got some
Well, what does the Bible say? It says,
deficiencies that
yeah, the first person without sin cast the stone. And the thing is, I'm sure they have something that someone would consider just deficient and worthy of euthanizing him. There's always
There's-
somewhere somebody will always find you lesser than you
yep.
should
Oh,
be.
you're poor. Oh, you're only marginally wealthy. You should be
Right.
killed off because it should only be the mega wealthy, or
The color of your skin, or your height, or your weight, or your sex, or your gender.
yeah, or you're a white person and some black person would be, oh, you're a white guy, you shouldn't deserve to live. So there's always someone who's gonna marginalize you or
Yeah.
think that
Bullshit.
you're less than them.
Okay.
People are shit sometimes.
Well, thank you. That concludes this
Session. Are you there?
yeah. Oh, and then also my YouTube has recordings of all of my
Ouch.
work. It's called Living Well with EDS.
Nice. Thank you. That was good.